Hello, Zdrasty and Labadiena from London. It's a real honour for me to be asked to take part in this conference on the vitally important theme of Lithuanian-Russian relations. I observed much of this firsthand, chiefly when I was based in Lithuania in the early 1990s. That, of course, was the beginning of Lithuanian-Russian relations, because before that we had Lithuanian-Soviet ones. And to me, what absolutely exemplified the best of Lithuanian-Russian relations was a small sign on the barricades outside the Lithuanian Parliament building, which just said "Litva prostitinam," please Lithuanians forgive us. And that to me showed the spirit of the protesters on Red Square in 1968. It was the spirit of the 1863 uprising. It was the common spirit, the common desire for freedom, which unites Lithuanians and Russians and Belarusians and Poles and everyone who's had experience of Tsarist autocracy and then Soviet dictatorship. And I've always been really pleased to see the welcome in Lithuania that Russian Democrats have received. It was perhaps less necessary during the 1990s when Russia still seemed to be itself on perhaps a rather bumpy path towards democracy. But it's become more and more important since the ascendance of Vladimir Putin and his Siloviki and the crushing of independent political life, independent media life, independent cultural life, and so many other things as well. And I think it's tremendously important that Russians who in search of freedom find a warm welcome in the countries that they can get to by train. Some people may be lucky enough to get on a plane and cross the Atlantic, and they'll find a warm welcome in Washington or New York. And we do our best in London too, insofar as the British libel courts allow us. And of course, that it puts some constraints on our ability to talk about the bad side of Russia. But it's those countries that are next door to Russia that you can reach by train, which are particularly important, because you are places that Russians can go to teach, to study, to discuss, to research, or just to relax away from the cold gaze of the FSB and the other organs that repress and intimidate them. And I think that there's a particular quality to Lithuania's efforts here. It's not just what you do in Vilnius, but the Sakharov Center in Kaunas shows a really deep commitment to the health and the development of these relations. It's easier to see these through the lens of national security, and that is really important. I'm always delighted when Lithuania catches or identifies a Russian spy, as you did with the consul general in Klaipeda a few years ago, who then popped up as ambassador to Malta, exemplifying perhaps the way in which not every European country takes security as seriously as it should. And I want to pay tribute to the work of the Lithuanian National Security Department with its annual reports and the bleak clarity with which they describe the way in which Russian subversion and espionage takes place in Lithuania and also their efforts to stop it. And I just wish that other countries would have the same willingness to confront and expose hostile state activity. Lithuania is in the forefront of this, and we have a huge amount to learn from you. I also want to commend the way in which you deal with Russian disinformation. This is something that every European country can learn from. And I was so proud a few years ago to see a team of people from the Lithuanian Defence Ministry giving a talk in London, and the room full of senior British officials all taking notes assiduously as they listen to the expertise and insights of their Lithuanian counterparts. It's not just government officials, also what you do on countering Russian disinformation in the media with Demasquati. That's really important too, and I wish other countries would follow that. And so this national security stuff is really important. But it's not just that. You also have your resilience. I'm so pleased to see the Lithuanian-Polish gas interconnector taking shape now. It's built. We're now waiting for the licensing. You're building physical links with the rest of Europe that diminish your dependence on those old East-West Soviet-era infrastructure connections. And I long for the day when Rail Baltica will be built and I shall be able to go from Tallinn to Warsaw via destinations in Lithuania on a high-speed railway. Every molecule and every electron are doing their bit to reduce your dependency, increase your independence, and therefore increase your freedom of action and your sovereignty. So all that is really important. But I want to come back to where I started, which I think is the key thing. It's the human connections. It is so important that we do not fall into the trap of Russophobia. I want Vilnius and Kaunas and Klaipėda and other Lithuanian cities to be people where Russians can walk down the street speaking Russian happily and freely without getting the disapproving glances that they might get perhaps in some other places. I want this to be a place where you can have Russian publishing houses, Russian theatre, Russian media, all these things which are so important because they are not able to take place in Russia itself. We know from the Cold War how important these surrogate efforts were. I remember during the Cold War seeing Lithuanian emigre newspapers, emigre publishing houses, the Lithuanian service of Radio Vatican, of Voice of America, of Radio Liberty. All these things played a tremendous role in keeping the flame of intellectual and cultural freedom flying and burning in Lithuania at a time when the Soviet occupiers were trying so hard to constrain and repress it. Well, now it's our turn. We have to do for our Russian brothers and sisters in the cultural and social and intellectual and human sphere what other countries did for Lithuania during the Cold War. So I really commend this conference. I commend the organizers. I commend all the people in the different institutions, particularly the Sakharov Center, who do so much to underline and entrench and reinforce these efforts. And my final point is that this is the worst thing for Putin, because Putin longs to be able to demonize the West. He loves to say that Russia is a besieged fortress surrounded by malicious enemies, ungrateful for their so-called liberation in 1945, puppets of the Americans, peddlers of fascist narratives about what happened during the Second World War, full of Russophobes, cold, nasty, cruel places, and only the warm embrace of the Kremlin can protect the people of Russia from these horrible outsiders. And every time that we hold a conference like that, like this, every time that we publish, every time that we have cultural productions, every time that we show our human connections to Russians, we are undermining that Kremlin narrative and bringing closer and closer the day which we long for so much, when the shadow of autocracy will lift from Russia and we can start again the unfinished business of 1863 and 1991. Thank you so much for having me, and I wish you a really successful conference.